so that if something does happen, such as right now, we're not connected, and if it doesn't come on, I'll at least have a recorded lecture for them to be able to, I'll post a link for them so they can access it, and we'll see what we do that way. I do not have a Blackboard shell set up for this class. I have a couple of classes in because a couple of them, I wasn't scheduled to teach them, and then changes and all sorts of fun stuff. And Ms. Garner has enough on her plate without my son to say, hey, create me a shell. Would you like a Blackboard shell where I can post the videos and some weeklies, the schedule and the syllabi with, of course, outline, so you don't have to worry about if you lose it again?
Yeah, because I tried to go on schedule of classes to download it from the.
You can go to the syllabus archive. Go to the syllabus archive.
And I had tried, but I was like, I couldn't even find it, and I was like.
That's probably because I think I loaded it up finally, but I didn't get. You have to realize I did not officially get told you have this class until last Monday afternoon. So I think I did finally put one up there, but don't ask me. It may not have taken because sometimes it does. It says it goes up there, and no, it's not good. But I will try to get a Blackboard shell set up for us, and if you guys would like to have that, and I'll try to do the weekly posting up there of what's due and all that, and I'll do announcements through it. So grades are still going to go through Insight. So no, not for you guys. Your grades will probably show up in Blackboard. The other classes all go through Insight. It's just easier for them, or at least it is for me, to be able to have them do it that way. So that's what we'll do. So we'll try to get that taken care of. As I said last time, we're looking at what was occurring prior to the official Romantic era. Your book, or your books, typically probably started at 1785. Some will say 1798. It is a estimation, if you will. The 1798 date, as I mentioned last time, coincides with the publication of a book called Lyrical Ballads, put together by William Wordsworth and Samuel Taylor Coleridge. The original plan these two good friends had was that each would contribute equally. That didn't happen. Essentially, there are only about 2 works in Lyrical Ballads that belong to Coleridge. The rest of them are all Wordsworth. Coleridge had health issues and eventually became addicted to laudanum, which is a derivative of the opiate poppy plant. So he was hooked on that for quite some time. Eventually did wean off of it. But what we have in Lyrical Ballads are the concrete, if you will, works that exemplify the traits, the qualities, the philosophy, if you will, of Romanticism. It is the work that says, here, this is what we're talking about. This is what we have been trying to get you folks to think about. Here it is in its full, blown, blossoming, manifestation. It is not that did not occur earlier. There were other writers who were part of this, leading to it. As I said last time, 1776 in America, when Thomas Jefferson writes the Declaration of Independence. It is essentially an Enlightenment document, but there are aspects of Romanticism clearly evident within that work. It is a work that is a political document, but still expresses the tenets, the feelings, the attitudes that will become very much a base for the Romanticism of the next several years. Those political individuals become important because in their writings they are expressing some of those views that the Romantics express in poetry or in prose. Typically poetry is where the Romantic writers are going to be. We see these political writers offering views that the way the government has operated, the way the countries, not just their own country, but other countries, are functioning, the way that society itself has become structured is purposely flawed, skewed, if you will, toward one particular class. And as such, the majority of people are not benefited. It's that social contract that John Locke had come up with in the 17th century. They are now taking parts of that, which is much more of an Enlightenment document, and they are looking at it saying, so what should we do? And they advocated change. Change becomes really a delineating aspect of Romanticism. Unfortunately, for some of the later Romantics, it becomes more like change for change's sake only. Okay, we were doing it this way, well, let's just change it. Well, why? Well, we just need to change. That becomes part of what Wordsworth later gets disenfranchised with Romanticism as he gets later in his life. That need for change, though, sparks revolution. We have, of course, the revolution in America. We have revolution in France. We have revolution in a number of different countries throughout Europe and elsewhere. That desire to alter the course, if you will, of man's state. The Romantics felt that that was essential. We have to change the world. I mentioned to you last time the later Romantics, we'll get to them. But Lord Byron, for instance, he dies in pursuit of that change. He's involved in the war of the Greeks against the Turks. He goes there and fights. He doesn't have to. He volunteers. He goes in and is wounded and dies during the course of that war. This idea of revolution, of altering the world, is emphasized for the world, if you will, by other writers, though. And that's why I asked you to look at for today and this week. We're going to be looking at the prose writing today. We're going to look primarily at Edmund Burke, and we're going to look at Thomas Paine. Probably that's all we'll get to today. And then on Wednesday, we're going to look at the two women, which are at the start of the book, Annie Barbauld and Charlotte Smith, and see what they had to go through. Barbauld especially writes, from a philosophical position. But we'll talk about what she went through. We'll talk about Charlotte Smith's life, which is just an amazing situation, what she had to go through. So that's what we'll look at for this week. Right now, I get to try to figure out how to do this thing. Okay. Hold on, I'm going to try to see if I can actually access the computer down here. Maybe not. Never mind. Okay, well, never mind about what I was going to show you guys, because one of these days I'll figure out the computer up here. Okay. I'll turn up the volume just a little bit. They said they couldn't always hear. I'm going to assume that Eustace has joined us. Maybe. Maybe not. Trying to adjust volume. Eustace is here. Good deal. Your camera's still not working. All right, so you guys can hear me. Still haven't seen Natchez yet, so hopefully they're working. We'll see. All right. Well, let's just look a little bit about the background of these writers. If you have the Norton anthology, there's a section called, I can't tell you the page number because we have some different versions. There's a section called the Revolution Controversy in the Spirit of the Age, where you have the works of Burke, among others. If you have the other book, there's a different aspect to it. I can't remember what it's called. I should have brought my long one with me too. But this is what they quote. Shelley, Percy Bysshe Shelley, and one of the second generation Romantics, as he looks at the French Revolution. The revolution is already ended. It's 1816 when he's writing this letter. Napoleon has been defeated. He has lost the Battle of Waterloo. This is the final time that they have to worry about Napoleon. He is in exile again and will eventually pass away. Shelley writes to Byron. They were very close friends. And he says that the French Revolution was the master theme of the epoch in which we live. What I said earlier about this need for revolution, this need for change, they really thought this. We have to have change. And they could not see, although they tried, many of them did try to present in a logical way why change in forms of government were needed. It didn't happen. And that's why the application of revolution, the only way we're going to get anything accomplished is to revolt. Shelley's view that this is the theme. This is what we're looking at. This is what we as romantics truly believe, was echoed by a number of others. Unfortunately, what it also meant was a devastating situation. The Napoleonic Wars, for the most part, were the equivalent of the World Wars in the 20th century. It really was that encompassing. The devastation on lives and properties, especially in and around the main continent of Europe, was substantial. But the Romantics felt, well, we have to do this. The previous era, that age of reason, had looked at the world and tried to explain it. This is the age of great scientific discoveries. This is the age of Sir Isaac Newton, among others. This is where they are looking at the world and figuring out everything. They're trying to explain how the world itself operates. They are establishing governments and saying, here's the system we need to follow. Probably, one of the aspects that you might have covered if you took first semester of British Literature, 23-22, as you cover the last part of the Age of Reason, one of the aspects that comes up is the Great Fire of London. You may have covered that in your world history classes. Great Fire of London, 1660s, right? Sure, yeah, sure. Yeah, we got it, no problem. That Great Fire, actually the result of probably a bakery accident, results in what can be considered as, if not necessarily a hallmark of the Age of Reason, at least it is an indicative trait of the Age of Reason. About half of London burned, was destroyed. They came back in and they planned the city. They planned it. What kind of blocks they wanted, how much a block should be, the idea about housing development, if you will, what kind of houses could be placed and where, the idea about commercial businesses, how to structure those. You literally had a draft made out, a blueprint, if you will, and they followed a blueprint to rebuild London. That's not how London had developed. It just, some people put some things here, some people built some businesses here, some other people built some houses over there. It had just, over the course of decades, centuries, had built up. Well, now they had a plan, and they followed. That becomes really what the Age of Reason indicates. We have a plan, and we will follow the plan. We will not alter the plan. The Romantics come in and go, but your plan doesn't allow for blank. And that becomes the Romantics aspect. We want change because you're stifling us with your plan, and your plan doesn't allow for the individual to be expressed. And the individual needs expression. The controversy then, as this section calls it, rises from that need to let the spirit of the age, again using the words, the spirit of the age to be released, to be fulfilled. One of the comments that's made here Um, they talk about conservatives. Yes, there are conservatives even then. You know, we talk about conservatives and liberals today in politics. They've been around a very long time. It says the conservatives um, in Britain who said they were the loyalists, true to the crown, looked at the reformists and what they wanted to do as treasonous. As they're watching what happens in France, you know, the reformers are saying, oh yes, look, it's wonderful. This is what Wordsworth, he praised the initial stages of the French Revolution, saying how wonderful it was. This is what, you know, man needs to overturn the system. And the opening stages of the French Revolution really wasn't quite that bloody. The storming of the Bastille, yeah, but then things actually settled down for a while. The nobles were not killed immediately. They were stripped of their titles. Every man was going to be known by his name, not by some sort of title that did he merit or not. When it kept moving, though, further and further to the extreme, that's when the horrors set in and the reign of terror initiated. And the people back in Britain, England, are looking, going, the loyalists, conservatives are going to see, we told you, it's that I told you so. And the romantic goes, no, this is not how it's supposed to be. Don't do that. No, we don't mean it like that. But nonetheless, it happened. What we have then are people trying to take a stand on the issue and express their views. And sometimes people latch onto one aspect and run with it, if you will. And that's what happens in other areas such as France. But back in England, you don't have that revolt. They've already gone through a civil war. In the 1640s, they've had a civil war, and they do not want another, which is why they try to keep putting in one monarch after another. You know, after I talked a little bit about that last time about William and Mary coming over. They were prepared. If they had a fight, they were prepared for it, but it didn't happen. That's why they then had Queen Anne coming in, and then go find a Hanover and get them in, so we can make deals and we can handle it. And if we're going to fight anybody, we're not going to fight internally. We'll fight people in other countries, which they wound up doing. They fought France for a long time. But what you have is this need to create a sense of stability. The Georges, the Hanoverian line of kings, actually give that. In 1760, when George III takes over, he is there for 60 years. Now, of course, he's crazy for about, the last 10 or so. Also, he has other fits 2 or 3 times. But that's why they don't get rid of him. He's still king. We have a king. We're going to look there. That's it. They count on that. They look to this, say, we need stability. And the Romantics are going, but he's crazy. You don't want to change that? The man is crazy. No, we're good. But they weren't. The discussion by Edmund Burke about reflections on the French Revolution captures some of these ideas. The opening part that's in your book, hopefully, talks about his view about the French Revolution. This, again, expresses the Romantics' attitude, although Burke would not call himself a romantic in any way. Although he was fairly liberal at times in his philosophical stances. What he comments about, this is what he terms the French Revolution. It is the most astonishing that has hitherto happened in the world. The most wonderful things are brought about. Then he goes on, are brought about immediately by means the most absurd and ridiculous. He said, here it is. The French Revolution has everything in it that we would want. It captures all that we see is needed in the world, but then look where it goes. And he says this is part of a problem. And he mentions later in this reflection, he talks about the theory. I'm going to come back to the opening part here in a little bit. He talks about the theory that is part of this idea. And he offers this view. Men have a right to live by a rule. He says that rule is the institution of beneficence. They have a right to justice as between their fellows, whether the fellows are in political function or in ordinary occupation. They have the right to the fruits of their industry and to the means of making their industry fruitful. He says, okay, people have the right to beneficence, the rule of beneficence, being treated well. They have a right, he says, to justice, and they have the right to profit from their industry. These are basic tenets, he says, that all men should have. If you work hard, you should benefit from your hard work. You should be treated in a just way in our society, whether it's politically, as in the court system, etc., or on a day-to-day basis with your fellow citizens. He then goes on and talks about, earlier he mentioned that beneficence. We need to treat people well. It's that golden rule attitude, doing to others as you would have them do unto you. That's really his sentiments. He says this is what, in theory, we need to see practice. And most people, he said, in theory, will probably agree with that. But it doesn't always work that way. He says, what man should not have is a right to an equal dividend in the product of a joint stock, and as to the share of power, authority, and direction which each individual ought to have in the management of the state, I must deny to be among the direct original rights of man in civil society. He says, I have in my contemplation the civil social man and no other. It is a thing to be settled by convention. It means we need to, he says it does not mean, though, that everybody should always be equally in charge of every decision, because that just won't work. Rather, that needs to be decided by convention. Well, as a group, we have decided this is how we want things to happen. Burke is a figure that offers for us an assessment. He is an individual, and I was going to show you some of this, but I can't get onto the computer here. It says it's working, but it's not. So, okay. Let me try this. Okay. Now, if I can only get it to, that's of course. There we go. Maybe we got it now. Encoder stats. Okay. Can you guys? All right. Well, let's see what we've got here. Okay. It does not want to cooperate. Oh, maybe it's supposed to be this keyboard instead. Yes. Bear with me. I have to log into my email where I sent this because nothing ever gets called up over here. And it's being very slow. We have two bars, as they say in the cell phone industry. Okay. Drag it. There. No. No. Best laid plans of mice and men off being a guard. That's Robert Burns. He's in this era too, so we'll get to him. Never mind. This is not going to work. Okay, now let me try to figure out how to get back to where I'm supposed to be. Nope, that's not going to work. Nope, that's not it. Excuse me as we're trying to get back to where we need to be. I'm going to turn the volume down just a little bit. Sorry again. That's not it. All right, well, this is great, because I'm trying to figure out how to get back to the other screen. There we go. I have to hit the start button. And eventually we'll get through what we need to do. There we go. Never mind, couldn't get to it. It'll take too long. Edmund Burke is an individual who comes to philosophy. Sorry about that. I had things sent to it. I was going to show you some nice little. Life is that way. We'll work on it another way. Edmund Burke is an individual who comes to the field of philosophy sort of pragmatically. He is born in Dublin. He actually is an Irishman, although everybody thinks of him always as English. He was born in Dublin, raised then in an atmosphere where he was non-Anglican, Church of England, which during this era, that wasn't always a good thing. We also recognize at an early age that in order to succeed, he was going to need to deal with employment. So he becomes the secretary to a lord who becomes the first lord of the treasury, really. He's the secretary for him, so he gets into politics in that way. His initial writings are such that he is trying to not write necessarily political treatises and advocating change. He instead does much more of a historical approach. Let's look at the history of the world situation. In your book, when they give you a little bit of background on him, they tell you very limited amount about his background. What he does, he publishes all these books that are a study of the English system, talks about the comments on the rights of man, just a number of different ones. And as such, he becomes accepted by the conservative government. When he works within the government, that's accepted. He gets elected to Parliament so that he becomes part of the government system as is. Eventually, he starts writing more of his political disenchantment, if you will, and publishing that. Reflections on the French Revolution offers a commentary, and again, in your little notes in your book, both books that you have, it'll tell you that it was sent as a form of a letter. You may not think this, but this letter, as published, did I mention this? It was a bestseller. People actually wanted to buy this. It tells you in the textbook 13,000 copies. You're going, that's not that many. Okay, 1790. Okay, 13,000 copies were sold in the first 5 weeks. Within a matter of months, it had gone through several editions. I think what the book says, 11 editions. What he offers, as I said, is a view about conservative government. He is at that time supporting the government because he's working with it. So he says, look what's happening over there. Yes, man has these rights, but the decision of how to run, as he calls it, the civic social aspect of life, has to be decided not just independently by an individual. Rather, a collective must meet and decide. The Romantics are not always going to embrace that. They're going to look at this view and say, but you're threatening to take away man's rights. That's why he is very, very intent early to say, no, man has rights. These are the rights that man has. The right to justice in a world. Whether it is on a political level or an individual level. The right to profit from his own industry. the right to be treated well. That's the basic concept of how man's existence should be. So this other stuff, look what's happening in France. Yes, we want man to be free, to be independent, those romantic sentiments, but you cannot allow it just to be openly rebellious of any system and discard that system, because to do so results in chaos. And chaos is not what we want. In this reflection, and you do not have all of it, he offers a further comment. This is, if you'll find it, I can't tell you what page it is because it's from different books. It's a paragraph that starts, but now all is to be changed. And this is the way he's looking at it. And here's what's happening as we're looking at the world. It says, but now all is to be changed. It's probably about, let's see, we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 or 6 pages in. It says, now all is to be changed. All the pleasing illusions which made power gentle and obedience liberal, which harmonize the different shades of life, and which by bland assimilation incorporate into politics the sentiments which beautify and soften private society, are to be dissolved by this new conquering empire of light and reason. And this is where he's really coming down against the light and reason, this age of enlightenment, the age of reason. Notice how he's taught earlier, the language he's used really becomes much more romantic thoughts, about that beautify and soften society. The idea about the shades of life. Now he says this age of reason has changed this. The decent drapery of life is to be brutally torn off. He goes on and talks about that the wardrobe of the moral imagination which the heart owns, the understanding ratifies, to cover the defects of our naked, shivering nature, to raise it to dignity in our own estimation, or to be exploded as ridiculous, absurd, and antiquated fashion. It says, on this scheme of things, a king is but a man, a queen is but a woman is but an animal not of the highest order. Regicide, parricide, sacrilege are but fictions of superstitions, corrupting jurisprudence by destroying the simplicity. The murder of a king or a queen or a bishop or a father are only common homicide. And if the people are by any chance or in any way gainers by it, a sort of homicide much the most pardonable, and into which we ought not to make too severe a scrutiny. So that's what it comes down to. He says, we strip away all of this in this light and reason. Well, the king is only a man, the queen is only a woman, and man is but an animal, and therefore we can sacrifice, if you will, such people. We can kill them with impunity. We don't have to worry about punishment because, well, they deserve it. And Burke's view is, really? Really? This is what you think? This is what you want? This is what a romantic view should be? Where's the beauty here? Where are the shades of life that you talk about and praise so much? Where? So what happens when we embrace too far the extreme? This becomes a central conflict within the romantic views. They want change. But how do you effect change without conflict? And if you do conflict with others, must it always be right? And Burke is looking, saying, this is what you folks are going to. He advocates certain attitudes. He actually is, fairly liberal in some of his views later. We have rights. He's a man who does have rights. And yes, governments sometimes do not work well within that. But we cannot just arbitrarily change. We must instead reach decisions in a more cooperative fashion, we'll use that term. Again, a little bit further in this one, same where he skips down, the paragraph that starts about, but power of some kind or other will survive the shock in which manners and opinions perish. And he says, it doesn't matter what happens. Somebody will have power. And it is the abuse then of the power that becomes the problem. And at the end of that particular paragraph, he talks about the spirit of fealty, about kings. At the very end he says, kings will be tyrants from policy when subjects are rebels from principle. So that's what's going to happen when subjects rebel because of principles. Kings, people in power, will become tyrannical because they're going to try to hold their position. That becomes a problematic aspect. It becomes a challenging aspect. And he looks at politics in a way that fairly pragmatic. People who are in power, they don't want to lose it. They want to hold on to it. What do they need to do to hold on to it? Well, when the people who are being governed start rebelling, saying that this is wrong, we believe in something else, well, the kings will either, the leaders, the government official, will either side with them and embrace that, or, as Bert points out, they'll try to stomp it out. They'll try to end it. They'll try to take this rebellion and stop what is being offered. The French Revolution, we say, starts in 1789. This is written in 1790. By 1799, again, I'm asking you to recall some of your history. By 1799, the French Revolution is essentially over. 10 years Reign of Terror gets eliminated because one man rises to power. Napoleon. They exchange a king, the nominal head of the government, or eventually an emperor. He will declare himself emperor later. Now, the common people are fairly happy about that because they think, oh, it's going to be better. It's not. It's not that much better. Some of them benefit from it. Majority of them do not. The nobles, of course, suffer from it. Meaning lose their property, he seizes property. He puts other people in charge of these estates. Get, awards them as prizes. But for the most part, really suddenly the system within a 10-year period, all it did was go back full circle. One man in charge, making all the decisions, putting his military generals and other people who are supportive of his in titled positions. They do get titles. So we're back to titled individuals, and you have, again, suddenly the working class people, still the working class people. The situation really hasn't altered. Bert calmly saying, this is what's going to happen. As much as we want something else to occur, it probably won't. Later in this, the very next paragraph, which starts about when that's ancient opinions, A-N-T-I-E-N-T is another way of spelling it. Ancient opinions and rules of life are taken away. The loss cannot possibly be estimated. It says, Europe, taken en masse, was in a flourishing condition the day on which your revolution was completed. How much of that prosperous state was owing to the spirit of our old manners and opinions is not easy to say. But as such causes cannot be indifferent in their operation, we must presume their operation was beneficial. So, okay, yes, some people were suffering, but in general, everything seemed to be working fairly well. Now what? The basic rules are that people should be treated in a beneficial way, benevolently. Maybe they weren't. That should alter. But it does not mean you overthrow for the sake of overthrow. Justice is still important. Are we really having justice? Is revenge or retribution to this extreme really being just? He looks at these ideas, he conceives these views, and he's really trying to figure it out. What you have at the very end of this is his final. It's really not the final part of the reflections, but the final part you have. It's that last little paragraph. Again, this was supposedly addressed to a Frenchman. He just made that part up. I wish you may not be going fast and by the shortest cut to that horrible and disgustful situation. And when he has described that situation earlier about the chaotic extreme, about what may occur. Again, 1790. This is before the Reign of Terror officially has kicked on. King and Queen have not been beheaded yet. That's still 3 years away. The nobles, some have been eliminated, we'll use that term, but it still has not stretched out as broadly as it will. So I'm hoping that you're not going that way, the shortest cut. And he goes on, already there appears a poverty of conception, a coarseness and vulgarity in all the proceedings of the assembly and of all their instructors. What that means, a poverty of conception. Remember I told you earlier that after the Great Fire of London, they had a blueprint, they had a plan. Here's how we're going to rebuild it. When they brought back Charles II after the death of Oliver Cromwell, the end of the time of no monarch at all, they brought back Charles to become the new king, the Restoration. They had a plan. They sat down with Charles II and said, here's what we're willing to do. They basically negotiated a contract. You can come in and be king, but Parliament gets to do this, this, and this. You don't. Charles was all right with it. They were going to give him a very generous allowance. He could have some input in government matters, but he didn't really want to have input on a daily basis in government matters. He don't have to be doing that. Wasn't what he wanted. As I told you last time, we go another 100 years, you get to George III, and George III recognized Parliament has the power, so let's get my people elected then. That's how, if you're going to get things done, get your people elected. And then he's able to get policies and laws passed. And over a period of about 35, 40 years, he actually went back and forth, sometimes with Parliament in his favor, sometimes not in his favor. Burke is looking at the saying, there seems to be a lack of conception. You guys don't seem to know where you're going with this. You don't understand what's going to happen next. And that becomes part of what he says the Romantics need. Yes, it's fine to be free of the restrictions of society, but what will you do with this freedom? Do you have an idea? Do you have a plan? How will you utilize it? This is what he says he seems to observe about the French Revolution. Their liberty is not liberal. Their science is presumptuous ignorance. Their humanity is savage and brutal. Now, Rousseau had called man a noble savage, capable of great and wonderful things. Burke says, what we're seeing here is just the savage part. Where's the nobility? And it's basically a reminder to the Romantics that, yes, change can bring benefits, can be needed, but when there is no plan of conception, when there is no understanding of where you will go with this, chaos results. And chaos, brutality, is not what man wants. his words are very, very strong in that way. The next one that you have in your book, for most of you probably would have been Mary Wollstonecraft. Mary Wollstonecraft Godwin is her last name when she marries William Godwin. We're not going to look at her Vindication of the Rights of Man. We'll get to her when we want to talk about Vindication of the Rights of Women. But she has a reply about certain areas. She's an interesting person. But we want to look at Thomas Paine next, from the Rights of Man. Now, Thomas Paine, as probably you best know him, is the publisher, of course, of the pamphlet called Common Sense. Remember that one? Yeah, okay, good. We know that one. Yay. He, of course, had grown up in England, had gone over to the colonies, searching for a better life, and had, of course, embraced the lifestyle of the American, and classified himself as an American. Is going to be later, after the American Revolution, hostilities sort of ended for a little while, and visitors from America were welcome into England. For a while there, that didn't work. You didn't get to go back and forth. But he was able to go back. And literally what you have here, the Rights of Man, are his response to Edmund Burke. He literally is addressing what issues Burke had brought up within the reflections of the French Revolution, and presents a stance that differs. The little note in the book says that this Rights of Man is the strongest statement against hereditary monarchy of any of the works replying to Burke in this, quote, war of pamphlets. He was over in England when he was doing this, by the way. Didn't sit well with the government, as it says, you get a little note there. He was charged with treason, so he had to flee. So he went to France. Next thing you know, the French government of the time praises him for his stance against all those who were against them, and they make him a citizen of France and elect him to the convention, which basically was their parliament. Here he is. Okay. He does get in trouble though, because of course you have changes in government there. So the group that supported him, put him into a position, gets overturned, and so the ones that come in get rid of all the ones who were in the previous group, and he gets arrested, put in prison. So while he's in prison, he writes The Age of Reason, where he does his assessment of that earlier era. It's an interesting situation in life. I had some other details for it, but we'll go back for it later. What we have here in this one, again, you don't have all of it, but he addresses about Burke's comment. Among the incivilities by which nations or individuals provoke and irritate each other, Mr. Burke's pamphlet on the French Revolution is an extraordinary instance. You know, think about it. The way countries or individuals provoke and irritate each other, you go, well, this one really stands out above all others. Really? This little document? Yeah, it's extraordinary. More so than anything else. You just have France and England have been fighting a war for a long time. The French Revolution disrupts it. America and England has just fought a war and denounced each other and all sorts of things. He goes, no, this one really stands out. His point is that neither the people of France nor the National Assembly were troubling themselves about the affairs of England or the English Parliament. He goes, People in France were talking about England. What is this Englishman doing, writing about France? It says that why Mr. Berkshire commits an unprovoked attack upon them, both in Parliament and public, is a conduct that cannot be pardoned on the score of manners, nor justified on that of policy. Now, the man should have kept his mouth shut. Literally, is what he's saying. Berkshire kept his mouth shut. What's he doing talking about the French? The man's not French. He has no vested interest. Why is he talking this way? Now, that becomes a little interesting attitude. Because what we see within Burke's commentary is an assessment of the general, although it's directed about the French Revolution. He's looking at the French Revolution almost from that Enlightenment scientific attitude of the previous generation. Let's put it under the microscope and see what it is. Okay, we're looking at the French Revolution. Not looking too good. Paine is coming from the position of, I just went through one revolution and looked how that turned out. We're good. Give this other revolution a chance also. He's not very nice about Burke. It's an interesting little commentary. When the tongue or the pen is let loose in the frenzy of passion, it is a man, not the subject, that becomes exhausted. It's an interesting choice of words that he says that Burke must have written this when he was passionate about the issue. Because passion, of course, is associated with romantic views, not the age of reason. What we see is, in Paine's commentary, a view about what is right. Hence the term right to me. What is right? He has a little paragraph which essentially is one sentence. And he says, Mr. Burke does not attend to the distinction between men and principle, and therefore he does not see that a revolt may take place against the despotism of the latter, principle, while there lies no charge of despotism against the former. If they're not revolting against men, they're revolting against the system. The way the structure is has to be changed, that romantic view. That going through the system and maintaining the system without recognizing that change should occur deprives man of rights. You don't have very much of this in your book. Again, quite a bit of it's cut out. Toward the end in your book, you have a paragraph that starts off, but Mr. Burke appears. It's on probably the last page, or next to last page that you have. But Mr. Burke appears to have no idea of principles when he is contemplating governments. He quotes what you have here, which really you didn't have. 10 years ago, says Burke, I could have felicitated France on her having a government, without inquiring what the nature of that government was or how it was administered. And then this is Paine's comment. Is this the language of a rational man? Is it the language of a heart feeling as it ought to feel for the rights and happiness of the human race? Notice that question. How that embraces for you romanticism. A heart feeling as it ought to feel the rights and happiness of the human race. A heart feeling. That's what the romantics are going to come down to. They're going to come down to this position. Yeah, we've got a little time left, but they're going to come down to this position that the heart becomes much more important than the reason. From the age of reason in the 17th century into the early 18th century, you have the emphasis on logic, consistency of explanation that looks at all circumstances and rationally considers those. And now the Romantics are coming and saying, but what about the heart? What about feelings, as it says here? The heart feeling as it ought to feel. Pain is expressing then a really interesting idea that's not necessarily counter to what he'd written earlier in Common Sense and what he'll look at when he writes Age of Reason. But it is an expression of a view then that the emotional aspect of man is as important, maybe even more so, not just on an individual basis, but also on a collective, the societal basis. That we must acknowledge the societal emotional state in regard to how we should govern. Now that's a little intriguing. Because typically what we want to have a society that is a structure for us, that is a comfort, I don't necessarily like that word, but we'll go with comfort for us, that we can look to and say, okay, they know what they're doing. Now, some of you are probably thinking about, yeah, right. We look at our government and say, well, they know what they're doing. Okay, but we count on it. We do. We count on it in a number of ways. When you are driving down the road and you see a stop sign put there by the government, right? We expect that stop sign to work. Don't we? We expect to stop. And we expect others to stop. Some people occasionally don't feel like they should. And the result there can be chaotic, right? If somebody chooses to run through a stop sign and other people are trying to go, you wind up with accidents. That's chaos. We need the order. What the government puts into place. Currently, you may have heard about the storm that's approaching the Northeast. The mayor of New York was on warning citizens, if you can stay inside, don't go outside. If you don't have to get in your car, don't get in your car, all these things. Get prepared for it, because it says it may be one of the worst storms the estimations are it could be a really, really bad storm. All up and down the northeast coast, from New Jersey all the way up to Connecticut is what I heard this morning. You're counting on your government to take care of things. Are you going to go out and sand the roads, salt the roads, clear the roads? No. You expect your government people to do that, right? That's why we paid our taxes. The government's supposed to take care of that. We count on them. We expect order from them. We expect them to respond. That's logical. It is a collective logic, though, something we just don't sometimes even think about. Well, pain is coming back with saying, yeah, but. Burke has his point, but what happens when we keep the system just for the sake of keeping the system, and it's not responding to the needs? As he says here, when the language of a heart feeling as it ought to feel for the rights and happiness of the human race. Last time I mentioned to you in the Declaration of Independence, Thomas Jefferson, that we have the right to the pursuit of happiness. And I pose the question, who says? Who says? It never says anything about happiness. go back to the Old Testament, the commandments, there's not one that says that thou shalt not frown. No. Happiness is something that we, as the human condition, as romantics will later like to look at, expect to have around us. We seek to be happy. That's emotion. And that's what the romantics become. That's what they really try to embrace. That's what they try to express. That's what they seek to offer. And Paine is saying to Bert, yeah, your ideas have reason to them, but where's the feeling? Man, don't you feel for these people? Look what's happened to them over the years and decades and centuries. Don't you feel for them? Do they not have a right to be happy? And those people are not happy. So something has to change. What we have at the end of your selection from Thomas Paine here, which is not the end of it, by the way, but you have the last two paragraphs. He's already told Bert that you're not writing fiction, buddy. You're writing about what's supposed to be factual. So we want truth, nothing else. We're trying to do this other stuff. This is why you're right. When we see a man dramatically lamenting in a publication intended to be believed that, quote, the age of chivalry is gone, that the glory of Europe is extinguished forever, that the unbought grace of life, if anyone knows what it is, the chief defense of nations, the nurse of manly sentiments and heroic enterprise is gone. Those are quotes from Burke. And all this because the quixotic age of Quixotic age of chivalric nonsense is gone. What opinion can we form of his judgment, or what regard can we pay to his facts? In the rhapsody of his imagination, again, notice the use of the language there, in the rhapsody of his imagination, again, Burke's seemingly being the age of reason. Well, you're not supposed to worry about imagination. Imagination is romantic. So basically, Paine is accusing Burke of being much more romantic than you may think. It says that he has discovered a world of windmills. A reference, of course, to Don Quixote. A little allusion. He already mentioned Quixote there earlier now, tilting against windmills. His sorrows are that there are no Quixotes to attack them. But if the age of aristocracy, like that of chivalry, should fall, and they had originally some connection, Mr. Burke, the trumpeter of the order, may continue his parody to the end to finish with exclaiming, Othello's occupation's gone. He goes on, and at the end of it says, this astonishment will cease when we reflect that principles, and not persons, were the meditated objects of destruction. The mind of a nation was acted upon by a higher stimulus than what the consideration of persons could inspire, and sought a higher conquest than could be produced by the downfall of an enemy. And essentially what he's referencing is what I mentioned earlier. Paine is saying we're not fighting against individual people. It's not that we look at the king and say we hate you. No, it's what you represent is wrong. It is that need to overturn, to reassess the principles, the guiding premises of life, and say which ones do we need to alter. And if those principles alter, that, Paine insists, will impact what will occur in government. Now, this concept of principles come into question a number of ways by a number of people. They're not all treasonous. Again, Paine himself doesn't necessarily get this, he doesn't necessarily become disassociated with the French Revolution. He's not very happy with it after a while, though, as most of them were not. By the time you get to 92, 93, you start seeing the constant shift back and forth. I mean, literally, governments change practically every few weeks. One person who's in charge reigns for a while, and then a couple months later, he is sent to the guillotine. Literally, it happened. That's not what Paine is trying to advocate. The violence that occurred and escalated into, as I mentioned before, the reign of terror. That's not what they were really looking at or for. In the revolution with the colonies in America against the British Empire, yes, people died. But you did not have the wholesale slaughtering of people. You did not have people arrested, sent to a mock trial of a sort, and then eliminated. That didn't occur. That's the rebellion that Paine can look at and say, look, yes, we fought for principles. We fought because we recognized something was wrong and it needed to be corrected. Says that's what the French are trying to do. And Burke should understand that. Unfortunately, the French Revolution is going to get out of hand. It's not going to work too well. It's going to dissolve to the point where a figure such as Napoleon is able to take control. And that's not really what, as I said earlier, the Romantics who embraced the French Revolution wanted. Wordsworth becomes very disenchanted with what takes place. He becomes very frustrated, and he doesn't understand, how can this be occurring? This is not where it should have gone. What happens is that the French Revolution becomes the extreme. It shows what happens when we go far, far away from the center. A much later poet in the 20th century, William Butler Yeats, will write about the center cannot hold. But when the center doesn't hold, everything collapses into chaos. The French Revolution has no center. What Burke states about it, which Paine, of course, argues in certain ways, what Burke states about it is really correct in hindsight as we look at it. Where's your plan? Where are you trying to go with this? What are you wanting to do? Because change is fine if you know why you are changing. He admits the rights of man, which is what Paine argues about. Man has rights. He admits that. Burke does. He said, yeah, the right to be treated well in a beneficial way, to gain benefits, to be treated in a just manner, whether politically or individually. The right to find work, to work at what you're good at, and to enjoy the fruit of your labor, as the expression is. Profit of your industry should go to you. But government on a regular basis, you can't leave to individuals. This Burke's argument. You can't leave it to individuals. It has to be decided by convention, by a grouping that then will follow through with it. When we leave it to individuals, what will happen? When dissent occurs. One person says no, one person says yes. Where do you go then? What plan do you have to deal with that? Paine comes back saying, but when a system refuses to acknowledge the rights of man, the system is flawed and needs to be changed. That's the principle, not the person. And it is on the matter of principle that we then should fight. Talks about it's a matter of principle, essentially. That same idea is going to be manifested in England in other ways. Government, as I said, they sort of stabilize there for a while with George until 1820 when he dies, and then other George takes over for a while, and then he dies, and William, and they get to, in 1837, they get to Victoria, and she's going to be there for a long time. So they stabilized a bit. There are still problems, though. You don't have England is fighting wars outside. They don't have the internal conflicts. The Pretender, the descendants of James II, still around in different places. There are actually some people trace their heritage back to James II, saying they should be the kings and monarchs of England. That problem surfaces periodically, but it's never a major escalation. What England has to start looking at, and the Romantics are trying to focus on that, are the individual rights. What people have within their system and how they are treated. And one of the premises that Burke raises, the Romantics are actually going to embrace, that man has the right to profit from his industry.
Your conference is scheduled to end in 2 minutes.
Okay, thank you. That idea about the right of industry, that man, with a capital M, if he, or as they will focus a great deal on, she is capable of producing, she should or he should benefit. And that society should not restrict in that way. And that concept of restriction is one of those tenets of Romanticism. Man should not be restricted. He should be able to produce what he can produce and enjoy what he produces. We're going to look at Barbauld and Smith next time. Two women who are in this era, who have issues with the times. They're going to offer comments about the time and the era. I'll see if I can figure out this computer up here so I can figure out how we get work the computer hopefully effectively. Barbauld and Smith, the two poets. I just have other poets. They're at the front of the book. No matter which book you have, they're toward the front. Barbauld is B-A-R-B-A-U-L-D. Annie. We're going to go with Annie and Charlotte. I don't know that well called by the first name, but read the background on it. It's interesting.
Your conference is now over. Goodbye.
Okay, our conference is now over.